In last week's episode, we talked about cocktail glasses. Let's see what you had to say. tfinest on the subreddit makes a really great connection between inconvenience and opulence, which is the other side of that really thin Venetian glassware that we were talking about. That not only is it a sign of opulence in that it is something that is not rugged and so is not likely to last a very long time. Sort of within that idea is the idea that one must be careful. They can't be rowdy when handling those glasses, and so that indicates a certain amount of sophistication or class or wealth, and I think this is a really great point, and also I think one that's very much related to a lot of the conversation surrounding the martini glass. There's a lot of talk. There were a lot of comments about holding a glass by the stem and how that keeps the drink from warming up in your hand, and that is the real point of that very, that V-shaped classic martini glass. And I don't know. I've spent the week thinking about this, and does anybody actually hold a martini glass that's shaped like that by the stem? I feel like everybody holds it by the bowl, but I think that this sort of, gets to this point of, if you have had a couple martinis, it's going to get harder and harder to hold it by the stem because of how overweighted the top is. And so, yeah, maybe the point is that it's very, very difficult. And this also inspired a really great conversation on the subreddit, so you should check that out if you have some extra minutes. It's a good read. Zombiepops. This is something actually that Ivy and I talked a little bit about, just not when the cameras were rolling. While we were in between setups, we talked a little bit about the tiki mugs and tiki cups that she has in the bar, and sort of disqualified them because they weren't made of glass. But I think the tiki mug is a really interesting thing because it's like, what does it signify exactly? Because the tiki drink is such a strange cultural aggregate. Like, it's sort of related to place, but then sort of related to stereotype, and sort of related to just it's almost cartoonish in a way. Who knows? We had a bunch of comments saying like, oh, we should make episodes about beer glasses, we should make episodes about wine glasses, so that we can talk about the differences between all of those designs. Maybe there's a tiki drinks episode in there too. Who knows? Maybe we'll just start a whole other YouTube channel. Freglance on the subreddit writes a comment that extends some of what we talked about in the episode, this idea of conspicuous consumption, and the cocktail in the glass is not just for your consumption, but to have a more gestalt experience, and then to also advertise that experience to other people, but makes explicit something that Ivy and I didn't really talk about, which is the fact that most cocktail glasses are in fact clear, that they are not usually colored, so that you can see what kind of drink is inside the glass. And so, we talked about the advertising of, here's a pink glass, or rather, here's a pink drink, and so that has certain connotations with it. But there's this additional thing of, what if you put it in a colored glass, and why don't we do that? Which I think is a really interesting question and a really great point. And then also this idea that Freglance talks about, which is the kind of the policing of drinking and intoxication that glasses are sort of implicated and involved in. That if we do want to communicate a certain thing, or if we do want to have a certain experience, we must choose based upon the parameters that are available to us, and in that way they can police our experience, which again is something that I think we touched on and talked about, but this is from another angle that is just, I think, a really interesting and great way to word it. Kevin Krupp and Sarah Blake and a couple other people asked why it is that Ivy dislikes the champagne flute, and for time we cut out a section where Ivy made a French 75, but we have cut it back together and put it up as its own unlisted video. So if you want to watch that, you can click. We'll put a thing will pop up so that you can watch us talk about the champagne flute and French 75s. GenCavox 4 asked whether or not the reverse of this gendered aversion happens, whether or not women get sort of frustrated or do not want to drink out of certain glasses because of what they see them as signifying. And kateisawesome indirectly answered this question, talking about how a lot of women in the bar where they work want to have 2 half-pint glasses instead of 1 full-pint glass. Ivy and I actually did talk a little bit about this. It just didn't make it into the cut. And she talked about how in her bar at least, what tends to happen is women will be proactive in their demand for a certain kind of glass. So it's not like they will order a drink, it will then be given to them, and then they will ask like, oh, like that's not what I was interested in, can you put it in something else? They will say, I would like this drink, and I would like it in this kind of glass. So in her experience, at least, she talked about how that's what she sees as far as the reverse of that kind of aversion. I probably should not have been surprised that a bunch of comments like this one showed up on last week's video, but I'm not gonna lie, I am just a little bit surprised. I think that it has something to do with some stuff that we talked about in our ad block episode, which is this hypersensitivity to being advertised to online. And I think that we're so prepared to be advertised to in every situation and want to avoid the extra cognitive effort that takes, right? Because we talked about advertising, being subjected to advertising being a form of labor, that when something even slightly resembles an ad or has the possibility of being an ad, it triggers that sense of like, ugh, here we are again, being advertised to. I mean, to be perfectly honest, of course I want my friend's bar to succeed. I like Ivy. We've been friends for a very long time. I want her to do well, and I would hope that she feels the same way about Idea Channel. But that doesn't change the fact that she is in fact an expert. She is a recognized expert. She's won Best Bartender. She's a glass blower. Her family makes glassware. So this is a thing that she clearly knows very well. But that does not counteract this feeling that this is still in some way an ad. And I find that tension really, really interesting. And just want to note that it's not going to dissuade me in the future from interviewing friends of mine who are experts in things, who also could arguably stand to succeed in some way from exposure in a YouTube video. I don't see that as a conflict of interest. Especially not because of all of the sort of rules that we have working for PBS. The way that we are allowed to advertise things on Idea Channel is highly managed and sort of even regulated. We're not allowed to advertise stuff. So if you have any questions about how that works, we made a video about it. We'll put a link in the doobly-doo. Just wanted to point this out. Thought it was interesting. I'm jet lagged. I'm gonna go take a nap now.